Hello, I'm Dr. Matt Coots, and I want to talk to you today a little bit more about the contextual intelligence model and how that works within healthcare, and particularly relative to change and innovation. I'm starting on the premise that in order to navigate the complexity of the healthcare environment today, that it's imperative that we adopt an innovative framework relative to how we not only practice leadership, but how we perceive leadership. So this is very much about your philosophy of leadership. And we talk about leadership in other courses, other classes. You talk about leadership theories and different things like that. And sometimes we fail to see the connection between how these other theories and other classes connect to things like innovation or complexity. And hopefully today we can begin to connect some of those dots for you. So that's the premise that I'm starting with, and I want you to begin to think about some of the things you may have read, some of the things you may have learned, some of your own experiences in leadership, and how those things connect to innovation. I am of the opinion that it is very difficult to separate innovative strategies and innovative thinking from your leadership philosophy. But right off the bat, most people don't take the time required to think about and truly assess and critically analyze their philosophy of leadership. Everyone has a philosophy of leadership. I would wonder how often you think about what your philosophy of leadership is, and even more important than that, where that philosophy of leadership has come from. And I would venture to guess you are like every other person on the planet, and that is your philosophy of leadership has come from your tacit experiences that you're not even aware has happened, or experiences that you've learned lessons from that you're not even aware of how those experiences have influenced, and dare I say even biased, your assumptions about what leadership is and how leadership should be practiced. The most important thing, let me back up, not the most important thing, but one of the initial things that you should do to start understanding what your philosophy of leadership is identify the people in your life who you think are good leaders and who you think are bad leaders. So make that list, a list of people who are good leaders, a list of people who are bad leaders that you know personally. Not that you've read about, or not that you don't have people that you don't have access to. So I'm not talking about where you would put your president or your prime minister or anything like that. I'm talking about people who you know personally who fall in the bad leader category and the good leader category. Make that list and then ask yourself, once the list is made, why? Why are they in this category and why are they in that category? And then you will begin to discover what your philosophy of leadership is based on. And then once you get to that point, there are several steps or several evolutionary steps that you can make to further flesh out your philosophy of leadership that maybe we can talk about at a different time, maybe in a different course. But for now, that's important. And the thing I want you to begin to challenge yourself with right now is, what is your philosophy of leadership? How often do you explore it? Because you can't navigate complexity. You can't generate the kind of innovation that you expect from yourself. And you can't generate the kind of innovation that you need to see from the people around you unless you first come to terms with that philosophy of leadership. Because again, it is foundational and fundamental to practicing innovation and navigating complexity. So in a previous discussion, I introduced this research from Rourke in 2018. And basically what he's laying out for us is that healthcare leaders are challenged maybe more than anybody else. Now, complexity is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Okay, so I'm not saying that other industries and other professionals don't deal with complexity. They absolutely do, and they do it at extremely high levels. However, it is important to note that healthcare has been said to be, and it's argued that it is the most complex of all industries. Whether that's true or not isn't the point. The point is healthcare is very complex. So you need to adapt a new leadership philosophy that embraces this reality. So we have a particularly difficult challenge with the degree of complexity and the degree of ambiguity that often comes with that complexity. So ambiguity then, as we understand it, is not having clear delineations between boundaries and borders. That's what an ambiguous environment is. An ambiguous environment is a fluid environment that fluxes and flows back and forth between different realities. When you have that, you have a very complex environment, and when you have that, you find that innovation is probably, and I say probably because there's research and evidence still being done on it, but it's probably the best way to navigate complex environments. So research from both qualitative and quantitative perspectives, which is unusual. That's really neat that we have this, this agreement that qualitative research as well as quantitative research says that one of the ways we can navigate this type of environment is by developing our meaning-making capacities as leaders. Now, here's the truth, and this is just one of those truths that, you can argue with me if you want, but you'd be wrong. The truth is, in order to develop your meaning-making capacity, you have to first know what your philosophy of leadership is. You can't make meaning out of the environment that you're in if you don't first understand where your own philosophies, influences, and biases are coming from. Let that sink in for a minute. Pause the tape, rewind it 15 seconds, and listen to that again. That's very critical that you understand that. Once we do that, we become in the top 5% of leaders that can do this, because the rest of this statement I have, and this is kind of a summary from the research, talks about fewer than 5% of leaders across multiple sectors within healthcare. So it doesn't matter if you're a physician, clinical, administrative, physio, whatever discipline you're in multiple sectors within healthcare, fewer than 5% have been seen to demonstrate these meaning-making capacities. You could extrapolate that to mean, or you could make the assumption then, based on that what that's saying is fewer than 5% of healthcare leaders have or know their, I shouldn't say have because everybody has one, but not everyone knows their philosophy of leadership and what that is. So I want to portray to you and give you some ideas then of how we can start that journey of developing that, making meaning out of our environments. And one of the ways that we can do that, and that I'm really keen on, is contextual intelligence model, or what I call the circumplex, which you see here in this graph, the contextual intelligence circumplex. And for the remainder of the lecture here, about another 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to go around this circle and unpack what each of these mean so you get an idea of what contextual intelligence is. And then I want you to begin to do the work of application and think about how this model of contextual intelligence relates to your healthcare management, and particularly, well, your healthcare management in general, and then specifically your response and your role in generating innovation within healthcare as a manager. All right, that's critically important. So we'll start at the top and then just work ourselves around. So you see here 3 color schemes, a blue, a red, and a green. The blue color scheme represents complexity and foresight. So within that color scheme, you'll see 2 different themes. The first theme are the dark blue, the dark red, and the dark green. Those are what I call the prerequisite thinking requirements to navigate a complex or a turbulent or disruptive environment. In other words, you have to embrace these 3 ways of thinking in order to create innovation within your sphere of influence. Once you have these 3 ways of thinking down, or these prerequisites for CI thinking, then that leads to what I call 3D thinking, or 3 dimensions of time. So, which includes foresight, which is the light blue, insight, which is the light red, and hindsight, which is the light green. So those are the 2 themes in this graph, the dark colors and the light colors. The dark colors are prerequisites to your thinking, or assumptions that you need to make in order to create innovation within your sphere and navigate turbulent environments, and then which leads to 3D thinking, which are the light colors. And I'm going to talk about each one of those two things, and then we'll be done. So complexity first, I talked about it in a previous discussion, and you may have access to that. If not, just a general overview is a complexity-based thinking is best understood as the difference between a complex and complicated environment. So in a complex environment, you need to learn to embrace integration. That means exploiting the value of convergence. The value of convergence is the new thing you get when multiple things interact together. For example, a complex integration of ingredients would be a cake, a very simple example. When you have a cake, you know that there are multiple things that were in that cake. You have eggs and sugar and flour and vanilla and butter and all different kinds of things go in to making that cake. You mix them all together, you get something brand new, batter. That batter then goes into an extreme environment, an oven, where it's under high heat for a condensed amount of time, and it generates something. When it comes out, it has changed completely from the eggs and the sugar and the batter to now something that's edible and tastes delicious, a cake. When we have that cake, we have now exploited the value of convergence. We have taken all these different things, converged them together, created a brand new thing, and now are deriving benefit from it, a sweet dessert. And we can have a party and have a host, and we can have tea and cakes and all of a sudden, and we've now gotten value out of all those different ingredients being converged together. This is what a person who embraces complexity sees as the benefit of chaos or the benefit of complexity. When multiple things come together and are integrated together, do you see that as a problem or do you see that as a potential benefit? If you see it as a problem, then you are more likely to have adopted a complicated framework in your thinking. A complicated framework is when you have multiple parts, you converge them together, but then you reserve the right to separate each part independently. So a car engine or a clock or a machine is an example of a complicated system. I have multiple things like a carburetor, a gasket, a spark plug, motor oil, gasoline, etc. When I put all those together, I get a functioning car engine. If anything is wrong with any of those parts, at any point in the life of that engine, I can take it out and replace it without affecting the other parts. That's a complicated system. Unfortunately, healthcare, as we've already established, is a complex system. So we run into a lot of problems, especially management problems. We run into a huge amount of management problems and inabilities to be successful in our management careers when we try to solve complex problems with complicated techniques. And we do that a lot. Think about this. So an example, just back to our cake example, if you tried to solve a complex problem with a complicated technique, you would be like the person who sees the cake on the table and thinks that, oh, I need eggs for something else. And you think, oh, I know that there are eggs in that cake. So you go to try and just tear the cake apart, trying to get the eggs back out of the cake, knowing full well you can't get the eggs back out of the cake once the batter's already been made, once they've been integrated together. And so often as managers, we try to go around solving problems in our departments and in our organizations or with our staff by trying to get the eggs out of a cake. We're trying to use complicated techniques to solve complex problems. Yes, you can go take a spark plug out of a car engine and put new ones in and fix the problems, but you can't take eggs out of the cake and use them for something else. So that's the difference between complexity and complication. And if you want to really be an innovative manager and create an environment where you are innovative and where the people around you are innovative, it is absolutely imperative that you understand that the world of healthcare is complex and not complicated. When we do that, that naturally leads us then to the next part of that arrow is foresight. When we start thinking of the environment that we are in as complex instead of complicated, we naturally get better at predicting the future. Let that sink in for a minute. We actually now look forward to the future, and that again does become innovative because we see things that we might need coming down the road because I'm trying to solve problems now in a different way. And when I start looking down the road with a little bit more accuracy, a little bit more intentionality, what do? I by default become more innovative because I try things that haven't been tried before because I'm now seeing the future, not perfectly, and you're not able to predict it all the time accurately, but you do become better at it. And our foresight then leads to tacit awareness, which is the next prerequisite in our thinking. When we have more foresight, then we naturally begin to see how important tacit awareness is. Tacit awareness then is an analysis or a critical reflection on your own biases and influences. In the academic world, we call our hunches that we live by, we call them heuristics. So heuristics is an important academic term that just means rules of thumb that we live by, or the assumptions we make about the world, the assumptions we make about leadership. Why is this person in the good leadership column? Why is that person in the bad leadership column? They're there because of assumptions you've made about leadership and what leadership is. You need to do the homework and the critical self-reflection. Where did that leadership philosophy come from? Again, why is this person in that column, the good column, and why is that person in the bad column? That's tacit awareness. You need to know, based on your experiences in the past, what you've experienced, what you've learned, etc., why people are in those columns. That's tacit awareness. When we start practicing foresight, that leads us more to asking the question, why do I assume this is true, or why do I assume that is false, or why do I assume this is good or that is bad? That's tacit awareness. And that, again, helps us create new knowledge, which is, again, innovation. Okay? So it helps us create new knowledge because we are now aware of what's affecting our thinking. And when we are aware of what's affecting our thinking, we pay attention to the environment much more closely, and we get even better foresight, which is awesome. But once we do that tacit knowledge thing, then we begin to move down across the bottom here, and we can now see more moments of insight, and we have more moments of insight, and we recognize what is in front of us right now today, which again fosters innovation at a great level. So these moments of insight are what we see, are what we call when the dots connect. We start seeing, oh, that led to this, and this led to that, and when I see this point to that, you start to see these connections and how things are related in a way that you've never noticed before. And when you see these things, you have these moments of insight, and again, that fosters innovation because now you see the unexpected, you see changes in mood, perception, and meaning, which is another driver of innovation, and you realize how this new thing has affected this thing over there, and you weren't even thinking that this would affect that. You thought it would be over here and affect this, but it really affects that over here. And when you realize that, that's called a process change. And when you begin to see that, you realize that what actually isn't what you actually expected, and out of that comes innovation. And that's what happens when we become aware of the tacit inputs in our lives, or the heuristics that we live by, the rules of thumb or the assumptions that we make about people, about our leadership, about life, about the world, etc. When we do that and we have these moments of insight, then we keep moving around the circle and we get to the point of synchronicity. Synchronicity then is how we make meaning of different experiences that we live in. And when we make meaning, well, first you've got to know that we do that. Every person does this. There is nobody on the planet that does not practice synchronicity. Synchronicity is a concept that was coined by famous psychotherapist Carl Jung. And you can just search Carl Jung, and he was a student of Freud. They had a falling out. He went one direction, Freud went another direction, but they are foundational pioneers in the idea of the psyche and the mind, how the mind works. And what Jung coined this idea of synchronicity, what he was initially saying was that everybody experiences what they know as coincidences. But what is different about everybody is the meaning that they make from coincidences when they happen. So for example, I'll give you two short examples. One, in healthcare, let's say you have an agenda item that's on your agenda, and I used this example in a previous talk, so hopefully you'll recognize this example. Let's say you're the manager and you set an agenda for a discussion item in a staff meeting. And then earlier in the day, say several hours or maybe even a day or two before that meeting, you hear other team members or other colleagues talking about, you overhear them talking about that same agenda item. And you have now, that's coincidences colliding. You happen to place that on the agenda item and hadn't told anybody about it. And then later on or earlier on, you hear someone talking about that same agenda item. That is coincidence converging. Now what you have to do is make meaning out of that. And there are multiple different interpretations. Just for the sake of ease, we'll talk about two possible interpretations. One interpretation might be to reaffirm that you think this is a really important topic because other colleagues are already talking about it. So you want to make sure you talk about it at the agenda, and you maybe even might remove other agenda items to spend more time on this particular agenda item because that synchronous experience has confirmed its importance to you. Or you may interpret it completely differently as, I'm going to remove it from the agenda altogether because it's already been introduced. They're already talking about it. I thought that it was a novel idea, that it might be interesting to talk about, but they're already talking about it. They're already discussing it, so we don't need to. You can interpret that synchronous moment either of those two ways. What the contextually intelligent person does and what the person does who knows how to create their meaning-making capacity that we talked about earlier, they are aware of when synchronous moments occur, so when those coincidences collide, and then they are aware of how they use that synchronous experience to create meaning and interpret the world that they live in. That's critical. The second example is more of a silly example in a home life that has to do with, let's say I think during the work day that I should buy my wife flowers today. And then I just dismiss it and go on with the routine of my day. And several hours later, 8 or 9 hours later, I'm driving home from work and I pull up in the traffic stoplight and I'm waiting there for the light to turn green. And I look out my car window and I happen to glance over at the window and I look out and I see a giant advertisement for a flower company, advertising flowers. That's a synchronous moment. I will make meaning out of that experience. I will first remember back to the past and think, oh boy, I thought earlier I should buy my wife flowers, but I forgot about it. Maybe this is a sign that I should buy my wife flowers and that somebody is reminding me to buy my wife flowers. Or I could just think of it as a coincidence and ignore it entirely. So that's a synchronous moment that I create meaning out of. And let's say I get home and then my wife is very angry at me for something that I didn't even know that I did or forgot that I did. And I tell myself, oh, you should have bought her flowers. You ignored those two signs. You thought about it earlier in the day. You saw the stop sign or the advertisement on the way home and you ignored it. And now and you tell yourself, next time this happens, next time I think about that or next time I see this flower sign, I'm going to buy my wife flowers. And then several weeks later, it happens again, and this time you buy flowers. And that's a synchronous moment. You've created meaning and maybe even a rule to live by, a heuristic. And now you tell yourself, every time I drive home and pass a flower shop, I'm going to remember to bring my wife flowers. And it becomes a habit. That's how synchronous moments become important and create those heuristics and those rules that we live by. The contextually intelligent person and the person that navigates complexity well, the person that makes meaning out of their life and the environments that they're in, understands how synchronicity affects them. The beautiful thing is that synchronicity then leads to hindsight. This is the best of them all. What the biggest mistakes we make as leaders and managers and administrators, especially in healthcare, is often hindsight bias and not understanding how the past has influenced who we have become and the philosophies we adopt. Again, go back to my original instruction to you on philosophy of leadership. Who is in the good column? Who is in the bad column? And why are they there? You need to go back and think about hindsight in a different way. When we go through that circumplex and go around that circle like I've just done for you, and we end up at hindsight, one of the biggest or more valuable take-home lessons is understanding how hindsight affects how you think about the world. And when we do that, we can navigate complexity so much more accurately. For hindsight to be effective, which again, hindsight is accurately evaluating the past. Okay, so for hindsight to be effective, you have to have a dynamic team or trusted friends or allies or opponents even who don't think like you do but have a similar value system as you have. So you trust them, but they think differently than you do. This is the value of diversity. So when you have diverse people in your life, people you trust but who have different experiences. So for example, my wife, my work colleagues, I trust them, but they have different work experiences, they have different values, and when I want to know what's going on or how to interpret what just happened in this moment, I go back and I ask them, you know, remember a couple weeks ago when I said X and you said Y? You know, why did we say that? And what did you mean by that? And how does that work? That's the value of hindsight. And when you do that, when you value hindsight, after going around this circle thinking this way, you often think about the experiences you've had in a completely different light, which is again, unpacking an unexpected event. Oh, I didn't know you meant that. And when you realize that, what happens? A new behavior, a new idea, and maybe even a new policy comes from that. And now you're managing your organization in an innovative way. So that's the CI complex, or the CI circumplex, and how it ties to innovation and managing complexity. I'm happy to talk to you more. I'll advance through the rest of these slides quick here to give you my contact information. I'm happy to talk to you anymore about this. Thank you very much.